not start. Yeah. No? So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the notable lecture of Tom Palmer, visiting professor. I'd like to start by thanking the Vice-Chancellor of Aston University and Chief Executive, Professor Alex Subix, just to give a few words of introduction to Aston and to Tom.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for joining us today, both in person as well as online. It promises to be a really interesting, notable lecture, or we'd like to call it inaugural lecture of our new visiting professor, on this occasion, Tom Palmer. Professor Tim Baines and his team and the Advanced Services Group, to all of your knowledge, have put in decades of work, commitment to advance this particular research area and practice area, in particular working with industry and business. And indeed, the visiting professor scheme is about bringing industry and business outside in with universities and bringing a different perspective, the practical perspective, the real-world perspective that informs our challenge-based research, that informs our impact-driven research and education at university level. I'm really proud that the visiting professor scheme at Aston University, and in particular the Aston Business School, is such a success, and that it has been so successful in attracting proven industry and business leaders of global experience. Tom Palmer, no doubt, is one of those leaders that we are privileged and really fortunate to have us join as a visiting professor, and who will no doubt provide invaluable contribution to advancing our servitization research and practice, but also providing that additional expertise and experience of many decades in the global industry, driving in particular servitization strategy, digital transformation, the servitization practice and improvements in Rolls-Royce for many decades. That experience of many decades from Rolls-Royce, shared with our academic community within the university, our academic staff, researchers, PhD students, is something that's invaluable. It's absolutely invaluable in shaping our insights and shaping our views about what matters, in particular, to the broader industry and business world. It is the place to be. Aston University, as we've launched the 2030 strategy a month ago, places this whole agenda of industry and business-led research and education, the impact agenda, the transformation agenda, at the heart of the strategy. And universities don't create impact, don't drive transformation working on their own. They do that by collaborating with industry business, by bringing outside in, by co-creating solutions that have the potential to drive socioeconomic transformation and inclusive growth. That is at the heart of the 2030 strategy. Hence, this presentation, the scheme the Advanced Services Group is driving, is also at the heart of the 2030 strategy. I'm in particular intrigued with how the Advanced Services Group itself has pivoted out of academia by building on world-class research and education in servitization, but then engaged with the real world, took that step to actually exist and operate in the so-called real world and successfully survive and thrive. And by working with the outside world, bring those insights back into academia. That model is a powerful model. It is a model that not every university or research group or department can successfully implement. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. So as with every startup, the challenge for all of us is how do you scale this up? And how do you basically replicate this in different areas and different domains and sectors? That's the challenge for our strategy. That's what the strategy will be about. Scaling up that effort, making that into a university model as opposed to a flagship or a pilot. I'm really pleased that we're able to host today Tom Palmer. And with the visiting professorship title, we also then accept our new visiting professors into the Aston family. So this lecture, the inaugural lecture, the notable lecture, we don't see this as a means to an end. It is the beginning of a journey of engaging with our community, sharing the insights and many decades of experience with our community, being a critical friend on some occasions, and co-creating with us some future strategic approaches and developments. So it is the beginning of their journey, beginning of their engagement. And I hope that, building on this, this Aston family will know how to get the best out of Tom Palmer in the remaining few decades of his productive life. I won't go too much into today's lecture or his background, because I know Tim Baines will give a particular introduction and overview of the context. So on that note, as Vice Chancellor and Chief Executive of Aston University, once again, welcome. I'm really pleased to be part of today's visiting professorship lecture, and I hope that you will enjoy the presentation today and engagement with Professor Palmer on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to say a few words of introduction. I'd like to start by saying that this session is a hybrid session. The majority of the participants are actually online. As we go through today's lecture, if any questions arise, please put them into the chat. And then what we will do at the end during the Q&A session, we will marshal those and ask some of those to Tom. So what I would like to do is to set a bit of context to the work that Tom's actually going to Tom, and some of the work that Tom will talk to you about. Servitization, manufacturing firms with a history of producing products, competing through outcomes rather than simply competing through selling products. Servitization is one of those innovations which is everywhere. In our sector, we see it as quite simply this idea of rather than just selling products, we sell services. In the financial sector, it's a move from ownership to usership. In the general management world, it's this idea about moving from outputs to outcomes. One of the big challenges, though, is to understand what's motivating this. There's lots of statistics we can put in front of you describing the benefits of servitization, but perhaps one of the most powerful to me is this one here. This is what's referred to as the SMILE curve. It's a hypothesis which is put forward by the economics community, and it basically represents where value is added in the supply chain, in the value system. The value is principally created in design, and it's principally created in the use of the product and service by the customer. Those traditional manufacturing activities which are focused on production and standardization of services, those activities are where value is least added, quite simply because those things are easy to carry out in any part of the world. It's the design, it's the services which are special, it's the design, it's the services which really enable companies to lock out competitors and to grow. When we talk about this world of servitization, we often talk about the different business models, different types of services which are out there. And we use this illustration called the services staircase, which Tom will refer to as he goes through his presentation. And it basically talks about there's different forms of business model. You can compete through providing products, right the way up to compete through these advanced services based around outcomes. We know that lots of the firms that we engage with and we talk to traditionally have a history of competing through products, spare parts, production-based competencies. And we know that their ambition, in many cases, is to expand that footprint, to get more involved with services, slowly but surely moving towards an outcome-based business model portfolio. What's the power of this? One of the most valuable cases that we have as researchers, one of the most illustrative cases we have as practitioners, is what Rolls-Royce have done with Power by the Hour and with Total Care. If you map the footprint of Rolls-Royce against the services staircase and look at those services that they actually provide, and then look at what the productivity of Rolls-Royce is, you will see that it massively outstrips the average productivity figures in the UK. Of course, there are many other factors influencing the productivity rather than simply the footprint of services. but the correlation is nevertheless there and is quite outstanding. To us as researchers, to us as practitioners, we want to understand how this servitization has come about. And going into the world of practice and finding people who are expert witnesses, who were there, who actually made this thing happen, is absolutely invaluable to us. I'm delighted that Tom has joined us, because Tom was amongst one of those key stakeholders inside Rolls-Royce, which brought about Power by the Hour, which brought about Total Care. And so today's presentation by Tom is going to share with you his experiences, his worldview. Before I hand over to Tom, I'll just reiterate that any questions as we go through Tom's presentation, please put them into the chat. As we get towards the end of Tom's talk, I will marshal a Q&A session. But with no more to do, I'd like to welcome Tom to come and talk about his time at Rolls-Royce. So, Tom.
Thank you very much, Alex. Thank you much indeed. Okay, that's all right. Got it. Thank you. So, good afternoon. And again, thank you, Alex, and thank you, Tim, for those kind words, the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here today and have the opportunity to talk to you about something that I care very deeply about, is important to me, and important to the manufacturing industry of this country and globally, and that is of servitization. Nearly 40 years ago, I left university as a young, aspiring mathematician, and I joined Rolls-Royce with the romantic idea that I'd spend a career pursuing mathematics in industry. At least I thought that was romantic at the time, and of course it didn't remotely work out that way. I never really did any mathematics industry, but I do feel truly privileged to have spent my career playing my part in the evolution of services within Rolls-Royce. I worked across the globe, starting businesses, running businesses, from financing to digital to maintenance, repair and overhaul, and finally to the position of Group Director of Service Strategy. And during that time, I got to experience and then more laterally lead all the development of all the aspects of the servitization journey. This strategy transformed the company. It grew from a tiny 6% market share to close to 50% over that time. And it became the leading case study in this area, becoming an inspiration for industrial innovation on a global scale. I don't believe it's any exaggeration to say that Rolls-Royce simply would not be here today were it not for this service model. Today, many industrial companies are grappling with this concept of servitization. This transformation represents a shift from product-centric focus to a model that prioritizes customer outcomes and the vast array of business opportunities that flow from this. This can take decades and requires a fundamental rethink of the business model. It's not at all obvious it's the right strategy for all manufacturing businesses, but if successful, it can bring profound advantages, both economic and environmental. And so today, I'm going to talk to you from the perspective of a seasoned, if not wizened, practitioner. From the hard-earned lessons of my career, nearly 4 decades of blood, sweat, and tears, overcoming obstacles, scaling operations, and innovating value propositions. I'll explain why I think the move towards servitization in the B2B markets is now inevitable, and why I think that's a really good thing, both economically and environmentally. And I'll talk about how I see the industrial landscape developing as a consequence. I'll explain why I think that whilst servitization is often described as a strategy for manufacturers, and indeed they have a lot to bring to this from their product knowledge, there are also some specific challenges for manufacturers which can make this particularly hard. But if they can navigate the servitization path effectively, I'll describe the dramatic benefits that can be unlocked and set out the key strategies that I have used to drive growth in this new landscape. And finally, because I believe this is a very important development, I'll argue that although the transformation has been underway for over 3 decades now, it is still immature, and companies are still grappling with developing essential capabilities. I'll call for more work to drive maturity and standardization in this space, and to make this transition easier and accelerate the benefits, both at the company or even the national level. So first, a bit of background, a bit of a reminder. Tim referred to this slide. Servitization started back in the 80s as a way for manufacturers to differentiate their offering through value-added services. Rolls-Royce was an early adopter and a classic example. And by moving from just selling aircraft engines and making money on spare parts after the warranty period to a long-term, power-by-the-hour model where all the support, health monitoring, maintenance, financing, servicing, everything is provided on a subscription service with a monthly payment, Rolls-Royce was able to move from a global market share of 6 to 50% over 3 decades. And of course, at the time, this was a hugely disruptive move. It altered the ecosystem. It caught our competitors wildly off guard, and they took years to respond. And they lost a ton of money in the process. We went from a business model that was dominated by product to one that spent as much time on customer experience, remote diagnostics, artificial intelligence, advanced simulation, and from linear supply chains to a complex network of service partnerships. An awful lot has been written about servitization since then, a lot of it coming from here at the Advanced Services Group, including this staircase model, which provides a pretty concise and simple description of the key concepts. But in summary, going from bottom left to top right, you go from services focused on outputs to those focused on outcomes, and services focused on ownership to those focused on access or usership. And using the Rolls-Royce example, this means going from we sell a product and spares to we guarantee you will always have access to a serviceable spare engine wherever and whenever you need one. Or even thinking of true customer outcomes, if that aircraft is powered by Rolls-Royce, it will always take off on time and get to its destination as planned and burn as little fuel as possible. This is no small step. This is a completely different strategic proposition. And this type of service, the top right-hand part of the chart, one focused on customer outcomes, outcomes from the product or the business process or platform the product enables, is what we call advanced services, and it's the topic of my lecture today. The advent of servitization in the B2B markets, of customers and end users accessing capabilities through services rather than owning assets and operating them themselves, is now, I believe, inevitable in the same way it has been inevitable in the B2C markets for some time. We have well passed the point of no return. Different markets will move at different speeds, depending on the competitive and regulatory environment, but move they will. The Rolls-Royce story was one of a plucky minor player emerging from 15 years of government ownership with a tiny global market share looking for a source of differentiation. It couldn't possibly have come from product because our product development spending was so much smaller than our competitors. But our service strategy created permanent disruption, it changed the industry forever, and it was truly a sustainable competitive advantage. Some of the characteristics, such as customer focus, are cultural and are very hard to replicate. And in my view, this change created a huge amount of industry value, partly because it led to the development of engines with much greater reliability. And it precipitated a significant shift in the share of value from the manufacturers to the customers, to the airlines. Our customers won, Rolls-Royce won, and this was all at the expense of our competitors. Today, economic and environmental pressures means this sort of change will continue to happen. Service-based business models will continue to disrupt industrial ecosystems at a faster and faster pace. These service-based business models will be powered by digital, increasingly by artificial intelligence, and through networks that enable the efficient sharing of assets and risk. And the drivers that powered Rolls-Royce's transformation and that power transformation, servitization more broadly, are getting stronger and stronger. And I call out these 4 ways in particular. The digitization of the ecosystem, the advent of smart, connected, software-enabled products, and the increasing availability of digital platforms to collect and manage vast quantities of product and usage data means that value trapped in the ecosystem becomes increasingly easy and cost-effective to access. The increasing maturity of the asset financing markets. When Rolls-Royce started its journey, we had to set up our own asset financing business. Today, we see financiers far more comfortable with a wide variety of industrial assets. Financing costs are optimized as risk is managed and diversified. The move to the circular economy, to accessing and sharing assets, creating a lighter ecosystem and making an important contribution to net zero. And then customer expectations. Everyone is evolving towards accessing assets off their balance sheet, particularly those that aren't core to their own value creation. Customers are driving their own sustainability agenda and recognize servitization as a vehicle to achieve these. These drivers now provide very clear economic and environmental benefits of accessing rather than owning assets, just as we've experienced in the B2C markets for years, where we access music and films rather than owning CDs and DVDs. Costs are lower, risks are in the right place, and overall, because we're sharing, we make less stuff. The customer wins, the earth wins, and the other winner, of course, is the business that successfully pulls off this strategy first. We're seeing power as a service, lighting as a service, barcoding as a service. The list goes on and on. And a research study last year of 1,000 companies, Capgemini found that 83% said this shift from product to service-based business models is the key trend impacting their industries today. And 88% said they would be offering intelligent solutions in the next 5 years. That's why I believe this shift towards servitization and the provision of customer solutions at minimum financial and environmental costs in the B2B markets is now inevitable. And our attention should now shift from will it happen to how do we use it to win. Also inevitable in my mind is the development of the supporting infrastructure for this. As the servitization trend matures, we will see the emergence of specialist, large-scale infrastructure providers, just as we've seen in B2C with Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud. In B2C, these trading platforms have been incredibly liberating and enabling for many businesses. New retail businesses have been able to reach niche customers globally through the immense marketing power of platforms like Facebook and Instagram, and then have been able to subscribe for the capabilities to trade with those customers through the likes of Amazon and Google. Capabilities like billing, payment, data, etc. And this ability to subscribe for capabilities from marketing through to delivery has resulted in a dramatic shift and democratization in the structure of B2C that we've all witnessed and participated in. In the future, we will see the same development in B2B and the emergence of the same type of infrastructure providers. And this is already happening. We're seeing the first emergence of specialist professional networking and community platforms where professionals with similar roles in an industry can collaborate around common problems. This is one example I'm familiar with from the aviation industry. It's a platform called Yakova. It's just an example. It's a digital collaboration platform for airline professionals. And through this platform, airline professionals from different companies can form communities, safely share data, work on common problems, and then the platform facilitates the interaction between these professionals and independent solution service providers, many of which they never would have previously known about. This is serving a similar purpose to Facebook and Instagram in B2C, and although currently far, far smaller, these will grow. And then in the future, on the delivery side, infrastructure players will emerge to provide capabilities for servitization on a subscription basis, including asset financing, data analysis, equipment health monitoring, logistics, billing, etc. This may be through extensions of current Amazon, Google type platforms, or we may see the emergence of entirely new B2B businesses. And whether these are extensions or new, they will be huge companies and play a pivotal role in our global economy and environment. Right, challenges. While the move to servitization and the supporting infrastructure is inevitable, what isn't inevitable is that it will be manufacturers that step forward to provide these services, rather than other industry participants, such as systems integrators, tech companies, or even startups. And whilst this is often discussed as a strategy for manufacturers, it's far from clear they're always best placed to achieve it. They certainly have some unique assets. Their understanding of the product helps manage that risk. But they also have some unique challenges that I've experienced and had to work through over my career. I'm now going to just summarize some of them. Firstly, inside out versus outside in. The challenge of moving to a customer outcome perspective is a huge paradigm shift. It's easy to say, but in practice, it changes the very foundation of organizational thinking from inside out to outside in. And it's a fundamental change. For years, manufacturers have focused and excelled at designing and producing excellent products while optimizing linear supply chains to deliver those products to a clear schedule. Their focus has been internal, centered around cost and quality, offering a high degree of predictability. Thinking outside in is very different. Manufacturers now have to think about customer outcomes, which might, and in fact likely will, involve solutions that go well beyond just their product. Thinking of solutions involving things, only some of which you've manufactured, to a manufacturer is a very difficult thing to get your head around. You think of it as non-core and highly risky. With inside-out thinking, value is created in the factory. With outside-in thinking, value is now created at the customer, at the point of service transaction. Demand is now driven by customer usage, and forecasting demand and inventory can be much more challenging because it involves many factors outside the manufacturer's control. We now need service delivery infrastructure that can be responsive to unpredictable customer requirements. Less predictability and the range of possible scenarios makes top-down, product-based management very unwieldy. Management attention needs to focus on the movement from command and control to a focus on getting the broader service delivery system to be ready to respond independently to demand wherever and whenever it arises. Sense and respond. The organization structure needs to adapt to put more power and decision-making closer to the customer. It's just not practical to have decisions made centrally. Attention turns to customer experience. From providing services that are demanded by customers to mitigate poor perceived service, to services that are designed specifically for a deliberate customer experience around a designed pricing objective. And then, of course, the cultural shift to putting the user first, taking on the accountability for ensuring customers' operation is intact. I could go on and on. These are all challenges on moving to address customers' pains and gains. It's a fundamental shift that's not for the faint-hearted, but done properly can provide deep customer loyalty and generally sustainable competitive advantage. Secondly, identifying the service proposition. This might sound simple and obvious, but it's not. Sometimes the manufacturer might be a component supplier in a much larger system. How do you servitize that? Sometimes the service, as we've said, might need to combine your product with other products and services to create something that's impactful enough. Sometimes there may be third parties, such as dealers, involved. Are they the customer? These can be difficult questions that take time and experimentation to think through. Strategically, certainly for advanced services, I would argue the customer is always the end user. In Rolls-Royce's case, that's the airline, not the aircraft manufacturer. And the focus needs to be on creating services that have impact at the end user level and guarding that relationship very, very carefully. If you cede this end user relationship to someone else, you risk becoming a sub-service provider with much less strategic impact. And when it comes to designing services, you have to think beyond your own product. You have to think about the whole ecosystem that you're operating in. And this means mapping out the ecosystem and all the key players and finding areas of opportunity that you can capitalize on. Then, of course, spend lots of time talking to the customer, involving them in the design right from the beginning to avoid going down an avenue that you might spend years on that just simply doesn't create enough value. Aligning products and services. When you change the business model to long-term advanced services, you move to a situation where you're exposed, as the manufacturer, to the cost of product reliability. Advanced services contracts are often long-term, fixed-price contracts where the service provider is paid a fixed amount per usage of the asset. And of course, under these contracts, the risk of product reliability is the manufacturer's to manage. While initially thought of as a risk, this is often the fastest way to make money. Improving the product to keep it operating for as long as possible with minimum maintenance interventions drives down cost and creates profit. And this needs to become a big part of the engineering culture. Manufacturers need to reallocate a significant portion of their engineering spend towards reliability and maintainability. As a manufacturer, you can't think of advanced services in isolation from the product. They have to work together as a system. And indeed, the more sophisticated the service, the more the product will have to evolve to get the best out of it. I'm talking now about the move towards intelligent products. Intelligent, connected, software-enabled products. Products that understand their health and configuration and can anticipate maintenance requirements. Products that understand their mission and what is required to achieve it. And products that learn and adapt from their network of peers. Intelligent, self-aware, connected, and learning. Overall, you need to think of the product and the service as a product-service system right from the beginning, designed to achieve the customer mission with the minimum cost and disruption. Number 4, partnering. Partnering doesn't come naturally at the customer interface for a manufacturer, but it needs to be a key part of the manufacturer's strategy. They simply won't have the time or the resources to develop the capabilities that are needed themselves. And because these competencies aren't core business, they will be slow and bureaucratic. It's important to partner extensively to move at pace and develop scale. In Rolls-Royce's case, we partnered through specific joint venture companies on all sorts of capabilities, from asset financing, equipment health monitoring, maintenance, repair, and overhaul. And in each case, these became successful businesses in their own right, often providing services on non-Rolls-Royce assets as well as Rolls-Royce ones, and contributing significantly to our bottom line. It was incredibly powerful to develop in this way. We scaled much faster, our influence was far greater, and we were able to focus many of our own resources on continuing to develop great products. If I were to do all this again, I would partner even more. I would be even more careful about what we call core and make versus buy, and I think we would have moved even faster. The challenge, of course, is to keep this partnership network aligned and to lead a very competent partnership management team. But if you're going to go down this path, partnering is essential and probably becomes a new core competence for the business. And the 5th challenge is the internal one. On organisation, over this path, manufacturers may go through many organisational models. We certainly did. In some, all engineering will be centralised. In others, all procurement might be centralised. But it wasn't until we managed to get nearly all the company's services capabilities together under one structure with one leader that we really made rapid progress. This means engineering, procurement, operations, customer management, all together with a common vision. And it takes quite a bit of maturity in services to justify and achieve this. And even when you get there, as a clear challenge, the company ends up managing 2 quite distinct business models within one frame. One business model still regarded as core, and the other, services, with a completely different cadence and culture. And there will be a clear tension between these two around allocation of scarce resources, such as investment budget and staff. For some people in the product business, things in the service business can look a long way removed. So you have to keep explaining the strategy, managing the stakeholders, and keep arguing the service strategy reinforces the core business, it doesn't fight with it. But despite this, don't underestimate the internal challenge around vision, budgets, and resources. In my experience, the customer was never the constraint. We could have sold more and faster. The constraints were often internal. So, I've argued that servitization is inevitable and the infrastructure will evolve to support it. I've discussed some of the key challenges that manufacturers will see in adopting the strategy. And there are clearly some profound implications to all this. In simple terms, over the next few decades, all OEMs will have to address the decision of whether to embrace this shift themselves and transition their offering to broader customer solutions or not. And in which case, they'll likely have to accept they may lose the end user interface to a third party that is providing a broader solution, and one which will be focused on capturing customer value at their expense. This third-party service provider that now owns the end user interface will be in a very strong position. They will have the ability to choose where the product is made and by who. But on the other hand, if the manufacturer does go the servitization route and overcomes the challenges, a properly executed strategy can release huge value in the ecosystem and provide the manufacturer with a strong and sustainable competitive advantage. From my experience, I'd focus on these 4 areas. Firstly, creating value at the customer interface. A richer and broader customer interface and a well-designed customer experience will help sales. It's as simple as that. Improved market share will increase absolute profit. Whilst it sometimes is the case that profit margins on service may be less than traditional spare parts margins in percentage terms, the increase in sales and market share will more than make up for this. Secondly, and this is important, creating value through aggregation. For a moment, consider advanced services as outsourcing critical but non-core processes from end users. Processes that normally have high operational leverage, but have probably been long neglected in terms of investment in resources, digital automation, etc., because they're not core for the user. The service provider takes these processes on from the user across multiple customers and acts as consolidator or aggregator. And then the service provider can drive technology into these processes. They can standardize, they can automate, reducing the cost of transactions, but also dramatically improving decision accuracy. Rolls-Royce has been doing this for 25 years, and it's a key part of the business model and creating a lot of value. Thirdly, value creation through the management of risk. And there are 2 aspects here. Firstly, of course, product risk. With servitization, the manufacturer manages product risk. The end user focuses on their own specific business risks. This puts risk where they're best managed and drives down cost. And secondly, diversification of customer risk. The service provider receives periodic and regular payments from multiple customers on a subscription basis instead of irregular and lumpy maintenance payments. This revenue stream can be remarkably consistent and resilient, close to an annuity model, and serves to diversify revenue risk and reduce financing costs. And fourthly, finally, I guess, value created through the alignment of incentives, less immediately tangible, but highly effective. Servitization offers a path to get away from the win-lose of normal producer-customer relationships, away from, I make money from services only when the product fails and your operation is compromised, to we both make money when your operation succeeds. And over time, this means the customer's operations are more resilient and products become more reliable and more cost-effective to repair. In Rolls-Royce, we found that if you can continue to innovate at the customer interface and use scale, technology, and risk management to drive cost, there's a big prize to win. So, I've argued servitization and the development of the infrastructure to support it is inevitable. It's a good thing for the customer and for the earth. That If they can overcome some unique challenges, it can provide a very powerful source of competitive advantage and profit opportunity for manufacturers. And if I was to distill my experience of how to grow such a business, I would lay out the following simple manifesto. First of all, consider where you are in the ecosystem and work at the right level, and with a solution that is impactful enough to the customer. If you're a sub-tier supplier in a complex system, it's going to be hard. Find the trapped value in the ecosystem and design a service to release it. Think like a service provider. Focus on customer outcomes and partner to deliver them. These services will be highly customized and lean heavily on data to drive efficiency. The emphasis will be on sharing, repairing, reusing, rather than acquiring and disposing. Focus on the customer relationship and the user experience. This will become a new core competence and is key to maintaining your strategic positioning. Be clear where both value and competitive advantage is coming from in the new business model, and prove both through pilots before trying to scale. Internally, be clear about how services will reinforce the core business. Don't fight the core. 6, don't spend too much time building infrastructure. It's very unlikely this will be your source of advantage long term. Outsource and partner early. 7, don't be afraid to go service first. You may be able to sell services ahead of product, and those customers are likely to become product customers later. So think about services that are at least partially product agnostic. 8, and don't be afraid to link up with other products and services to create a solution. As I've said a couple of times, I think in many cases these services will comprise multiple products and services from different manufacturers to have sufficient impact to be successful. And watch out. If you decide this isn't for you, then be very attentive to where the service is going to come from, because it will come, and adapt your product to fit. The new service provider will hopefully be your new customer, but their requirements will be different from your current end user. And 10, finally, and most of all, commit yourself to this journey with a determination to keep adapting until you are successful. So, how do we make it easier? There's a lot to play for here, lots of value trapped in our current industrial ecosystems. As I've discussed, over time, technology and economic forces will release that value. We couldn't stop it, even if we wanted to. Much of it will happen through the vehicle of servitization in one form or another. Hopefully, manufacturers will get a large share of that and improve their competitive position. But it's hard. The process and capabilities are still immature, and as explained, manufacturers have significant challenges to overcome. We need to accelerate the process. We need to get the economic and environmental value quicker. We need to protect and rejuvenate our precious manufacturing base faster. And it begs the question, how do we make this journey easier so when a manufacturer decides it is time for them to go down this journey, they already have the map, but also the vehicle and the infrastructure to get them there. And from my experience, there right now are 2 clear priorities. Firstly, a defined methodology, a prescriptive set of steps that maximizes your chance of success, built on extensive experience and research. Of course, I'm talking to you today here from the Aston Business School, the very hub of experience and research in advanced services. Unfortunately, I haven't written a book to plug, but I can plug Tim's. And early next year, Tim and team will release his new book, and alongside this, we'll release the first version of a methodology, the playbook for advanced services. The playbook will break down servitization into its main stages and the key activities, together with how-tos and tips and tools, and it'll address both the service business model itself, the value proposition, the target market, the pricing, as well as the organizational context of the firm, management of change, organisation structure, resourcing, etc. All coming from the world's foremost centre for research into advanced services. It's a very important step forward. Secondly, we need a standard capability model, an open source reference model for the capabilities required for servitization, together with an index of curated solution providers for these capabilities, a capability marketplace, if you will. And in time, this could evolve into a servitization platform, which would facilitate the interaction between manufacturers attempting to servitize and the emerging providers of these competencies on a subscription basis. The beginnings of an infrastructure that companies could plug into to handle data, enable analysis, provide financing, insurance, etc., in a cost-effective and expedient manner. If these had existed when Rolls-Royce started their journey, it would have been a great deal faster, cheaper, and easier, and I would still have a full head of hair. Okay, in summary, the path to servitization is not easy, but the opportunity is huge. It's a journey that requires adaptation, innovation, and perseverance. It's a journey that promises not just success for individual businesses, but a more sustainable and efficient future for our planet. In the future, winners will have intelligent, connected products and be able to work with services infrastructure platforms to enable their services. Our industrial manufacturers need help on this journey, help to overcome their inherent challenges, but also help to drive maturity of the capabilities faster. We have reached a tipping point, a point at which change is now inevitable, and we're beginning to see the emergence of tools, platforms, and infrastructure that will accelerate this transformation. It's time to move from will this happen to how do we use this to win. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to get something clear before we start the question and answer session. I did not pay Tom to say those kind words, but I will do later.
You will do later, yeah.
And what we're going to do now is take a series of questions to our guests online. If I could invite you to put any questions into the chat, and we will pose those questions to Tom on your behalf. Just while we're doing that, just to reiterate this, our book, which is taken us 18 months to write, but 10 years to develop, will be out around about February, March time next year. And Tom, you'll be getting your first copy. So, at this point, ladies and gents, if I may, I'll open up to the audience in the room, first of all. Is there any questions anybody would like to pose to Tom? Tom, please.
We'll stand over there. Hello, Ian.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. We thoroughly enjoyed that. Could I just go back to your description about how coverage is going to change? Do you think there's going to be a different set of skills or education that's required for young people coming into manufacturers in the world that you see? You quote your own experience as a mathematician going to work. What do you think is going to be the requirement for new people going into this new world of manufacturing?
Well, that's a great question, isn't it? So if, as I hope, the product service system thinking and services part of the future grows more and more and more, then we'd like skills in our joiners to the business to learn those skills at the same time as manufacturing. The skills that's going to drive servitization are some of the ones I described. They're going to be digital, they're going to be automation, they're going to be AI, they're going to be machine learning, as well as the customer side. There's no substitute for customer experience, customer empathy, customer understanding. So I think some of the skills will be the same across both manufacturing and services, and some will, of course, be more akin to services because of their direct contact with the customer. But with the future in mind, I think manufacturers need to and will be recruiting a broader set of skills to complement that strategy. And
any further questions in the room?
Thanks, Tom. You talked about the internal challenges at Rolls-Royce. Did you see more resistance from board level or the operational delivery teams?
so I'm absolutely certain it's not just Rolls-Royce, because there's lots of research to say some of the greatest difficulties in servitizing is this challenge, this cultural challenge within a manufacturer. Rolls-Royce was just one example of it. It comes, of course, from all parts of the organisation. Probably less the board, to be honest. There tends to be, wide thinking and see the whole picture, and it's entirely understandable because there's a view of what is core and what we've always done versus what is new and different, and it's often well-meaning. And it only really comes to be a difficulty when it comes to, say, the fight around particular scarce resources. But I say less so from the board and more so from the core of the organisation.
So on that point, we'll start to take questions from the online audience. Christina?
Yeah, we have a question from Faison. Do you think there is a specific asset type or value of asset where servitization becomes a no-brainer for the customer, or where customers find more acceptance for it? In his experience, industrial subscription, customers don't really like industrial subscription for a lot of assets. So he's wondering whether there is a threshold for the type or the cost of an asset.
Yeah, well, I think it starts and it moves. I think complex assets which are a challenge to maintain, where the customer has to invest in resources to maintain, look after the asset. They require real skills to look after it. I mean, that's where this starts, because it's not a core competence of the customer. It requires investment on their side. It's the last thing they really want to be investing in, but it's still critical to their operation. Those are the assets where it starts, but it has to be high impact for the customer's operation. And I don't think it's just, as I try to get across, I don't think it's just subscribing for assets. I think it has to be a service which is more than that. It's not just about financing an asset. It's not just about getting access on different terms. That's what I tried to explain in the section around value proposition. We need to find and create additional value. So I think it starts with highly complex assets which are critical to a user's process, which they'd rather somebody else took care of, frankly. But it's not just about financing the asset and subscribing to an asset.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so this question is from Parikshit. If an equipment manufacturer has to deal with several stakeholders, such as distributors and installers, who should be the target customer of advanced services?
Well, as I said, to me, and obviously every case is different, to me the eventual target is the end user. And that's where we're trying to add value. That's where I think the value can be created. And where there are dealers and distributors, then we'd like to find a way that we can all work to create value at the end user. But certainly my background is end user first. I know every industry is slightly different.
Is that okay, Christina?
Do we have any more in the room?
Any further ones inside the room?
Thank you. Tom, when you liken the change to, in the B2C world, the likes of Google and Amazon as those platform players, I guess we see now some catch-up from regulatory and government bodies and I guess public opinion sometimes about the strength and the reach that these platforms have and the effect that they have. Do you foresee that the sort of platform that you're describing could trigger similar concerns around competitiveness, etc., and how that might be forestalled or how it might develop?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just think inevitably, I'm using the word inevitable, that's the way that markets will emerge and evolve. We'll see infrastructure provided by, because of the economies of scale, it is correct and cost effective that infrastructure is shared, and that implies only a relatively small number of providers in order to get that scale. That is what's happened in B2C. It is what will happen in B2B. It will take time. Of course, the other edge to that is if they get too big and there's only one or two, that's why we have governments and regulation to make sure there's competition. But that's the way it'll go. And of course, it will require regulation to protect us all. So there's a level of competition, because if all that value ends up going to the infrastructure providers, then that's not what we set out to achieve.
Yeah. Some of the questions from online, so it's from David. Knowing what you need to do and having the capability to do it are not the same thing. Change to mindset, to process, to organization and culture, etc. What skills and resources do you need to deliver this?
Well, that's a very broad question, isn't it? What skills and resources?
This is a good opportunity for me to plug the book, because that's what we talk about in the book. So thank you for David for that. But I think the question is about what skills and resources to bring about that change programme.
Is about the change programme? Fine, okay. The management of change. So it's going to be about managing stakeholders. It's going to be about communication, developing an argument, developing a coalition, getting your peers on board, being able to think through the business model in a compelling way, talk to customers in the early stage and get customers on board. So at least at the first stage, this is about innovation, entrepreneurialism, creating a coalition, arguing, getting on board stakeholders, managing the board. Those are the skills that you need right at the beginning, and they're enough to convince a customer to pilot something with you, and then a launch customer to buy something from you, and then you're in a whole different world. Then you're in scaling and process and all the rest of it.
Tom, thank you. That's entirely consistent with step one of the process in the book. So well done. Thank you. Kitty, another question for the line.
You think it was my book?
Yeah, we've got another question from Gervais. We are starting the process of servitization, B2B, and manufacturing of IoT for the past few years, but it is difficult to scale it, and our top management is willing, but it is risk averse. What would be your advice to make the scale up happen? At what stage do you think servitization is a success in a company with a legacy of manufacturing and product-based?
And if I may, I think that's step 3 in the book. So would you like to?
Well, you could go ahead and answer it then, can't you, smarty pants? Sorry, so it's risk averse. Yeah, of course you're risk averse. This is a brand new step, and it has to be done incrementally, step by step. I would not advocate you suddenly try and change the business overnight and look like you're something different to your customers. I think your customers will tell you how fast you're going to go. And I think to dilute the risk aversion, you need to get the customers in. You need to get them to give you confidence that what you're doing is correct. And they will, if you're on the right path, you'll know it, because they'll be pulling more and more from you. And the board and the management will listen to that. So I think that's how you know you're on the right path. And I think that's how you scale behind that. And you scale behind the market traction. You don't scale ahead because you might not get the traction. And that's how you do it in a way which manages the risk and manages your internal stakeholders.
Thank you very much.
There's,
I think we've got time perhaps to just one more.
yeah. So one really good question, and also from me as well, because my research will involve this thing. So in a servitization model, collaboration with various partners becomes crucial. Can you share insights into how Rolls-Royce collaborated with suppliers, technology providers, or other stakeholders to enhance its service offerings? And also, from me, what is the right time to do it?
This is not a book, so please.
I think, just thinking the Rolls-Royce experience, we went to the right time. It was very early on. As I gave the example of the asset financing business. That was a long time ago. It's probably 30 years ago or more we started the asset financing business. So right at the outset, we could see financing was important. And we knew that for Rolls-Royce to become a financing business would take a huge amount of our balance sheet. So we partnered immediately with financial institutions and created something very bespoke around our business. That has become a hugely successful business to this day. Similarly on equipment health monitoring, which is all about data, simulation, machine learning. Again, we had been too slow. So we made a decision right at the beginning that we would need to partner for that capability in order to bring in some expertise and move at a pace. And we developed this capability to partner successfully and cooperate in cooperation with others to build out these capabilities. And we saw it early on. And I would say it is an early stage. As soon as you see that's something you're going to need, ask yourself the question, well, who's going to provide that then? Do I build this myself or do I get it? And you can tell. My advice would be, in most cases, try and find a partner to do this with you, with the only proviso that all these partnerships need their very careful mentoring to keep them aligned and going in the right strategic direction. Because once they get their own board of directors, their own strategies, it's easy to get lost, and you need to keep them aligned towards your business strategy.
Thank you.
One more? We have time for one more?
We have a question from Mike Curl. At Rolls-Royce, how did you go about setting or testing prices for the initial service packages and subscription models? Did you just take asset price, lifespan, or did customers see the benefits immediately, enabling you to charge a premium?
I'm not sure I'm going to talk about Rolls-Royce pricing. I'll talk more about what I think about services, this sort of service more generally, if that's okay. I think pricing is a difficult area here because sometimes you think you've created a lot of value, and what the customer sees is a software system. He thinks, oh, I'm not going to pay for that. I think in terms of the more entrepreneurial stuff that we did and what I've seen elsewhere, if you understand the value you're creating and you're pitching the price between a third and a half, that is a good place to start. That's what I've seen work in other companies as well as some small parts in Rolls-Royce. So you need to start somewhere. You're not going to get half the value. Pitch it to the third and work from there would be my advice.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to a conclusion of Tom's notable, distinguished, inaugural lecture. I'd like to say thank you very much for our audience online. Thank you very much for our audience
Thank you very
in the
much.
room. In particular, thank you very much for
You're very welcome.
for joining the group and being with us today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.